So here's what a basic synth lead sounds like. And here's the same synth sound, but with a more professional touch. I want to start with the quick and easy changes you can do to make synth sound better. Then we'll dive a little deeper and talk about accent layers and 3D mixing, both of which I think are really cool ways to step up the quality of your tracks. So both of those examples I played are actually from the same synth sound. They're both from this random Nexus preset. And I didn't actually change anything within this synth to make it sound better. The first thing I did was go into the MIDI to make some changes there. An underrated thing to think about is note length. Listen to the difference between these when I just changed the length of some of the notes. I just try to think about what I want the rhythm to sound like in my head. Like in this case, it was gonna be da 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 da. That's why these two notes ended up being longer than the other ones, so I could emphasize them more. If all the notes are the same exact length, then it ends up sounding too robotic. So even making little changes like this, just to humanize it a little more so they're not all the exact same length, can help a lot. Then I know I talk about this all the time, but adding little pitch bends goes a long way to make a synth sound more professional and give it more movement. The key is to do it tastefully though, and not overuse them like I've been guilty of in the past. The next easy changes we could make is just to properly process the sound. The first thing I notice is just the overall tone sounds off to me. The high end is really harsh. You can see a bunch of harsh frequencies around this area. So I ended up reducing those harsh frequencies with EQ. Here's the before and after. And when you're doing EQ changes, it's always good to add some makeup gain or reduce the makeup gain just so the volumes of the changes are the same before and after. So that way you could really properly compare if it's actually helping the sound or not. Then I just ended up changing the delay on the sound to make it sound a little more retro. So those are the simple things I did to get it sounding better. Now for the more interesting changes that you can make. So first, I like to pick a couple notes in the lead melody to emphasize. For this track, it was the last two notes in each phrase that bend into each other that I wanted to emphasize. So what I want to do here is add a new sound to layer on top of the main synth. I'm going to use this big atmospheric synth from my melodic house pack. And instead of having it play all the lead melody notes, I'm only going to keep the notes I want to emphasize. So here's what that sounds like layered with the main synth. That adds some really nice variation in there and just keeps it from getting boring. Then I went a little crazy and added an accent layer to my accent layer. So I added in this sound that's just really high in the frequency spectrum. And I copied over that MIDI from the accent layer, except this time I'm gonna mute the accent layer every 2 bars. So now it's just accenting every 4 bars. So that's just gonna make every second pitch bend have a little extra energy. The last thing I'm going to talk about is layering using 3-dimensional mixing. I've talked about this in another video, which I'll link below, but it's actually a lot simpler than it sounds. So 2-dimensional mixing is when you think about where everything in your mix sits in the frequency spectrum. And 3D mixing is when you add time as a third variable. So you're just thinking about how the frequency spectrum is changing over time. If we apply this idea to a synth sound, we can start to think about how to make it sound even better. So let's just look at one note from this synth over time using this oscilloscope. So we can split this sound up into 3 parts: the transient, the body, and the tail. And I wanted this sound to cut through the mix more, so to do that, I had to focus on the transient. So I ended up adding this layer to boost that initial attack. It's super short. You can see it barely takes up any time. But layered with that main synth, it really helps it cut through. I also wanted the overall sound to feel bigger and more atmospheric. So for that, I focused on the tail. I ended up finding the sound that had a longer release and is wider in the mix that worked really well. So now if I play those with the lead melody, just adding those two layers allowed us to go from this to this. So let's do a before and after of all of the changes. Hopefully you guys like this one. I'll catch you next time. Peace.